The silence of humanity. For centuries, the galaxy had spoken of Earth as nothing more than a myth, a name whispered like a bedtime story to alien children who could not sleep. Humanity was considered long gone, wiped out in the ancient wars that had shaken the stars and left scars across countless worlds. Entire archives listed them as extinct. Some even celebrated the end of a species that had once fought like no other. Yet there were those who remembered the strange and terrible stories of human warriors who did not surrender and who turned every weakness into a weapon. To many scholars, those tales were exaggerations, fables carved out of fear and passed down over generations until they became legend. But then everything changed. It began with a faint signal, a cry for help that echoed through the endless black of space. The universal distress channel carried it, desperate and broken. A colony world near the fringe of the Orion Belt was under attack by raiders and their fleets, burned cities and silenced millions. No one expected an answer. Few in the Galactic Council cared to intervene, for the colony belonged to a minor species with no great alliances and no strong fleets. They were considered expendable victims of the harsh realities of galactic politics. Yet as the colony's beacon screamed into the void, another signal stirred, one that had not been heard in thousands of years. The reply was simple, short and clear. A frequency that many had forgotten sparked across the channel, and an emblem appeared on screens all across the network. It was not the banner of a council world or a merchant fleet. It was the old insignia of Earth, the circle of blue and white that once marked the ships of humanity. Across, the galaxy commanders froze, politicians stared in disbelief, and historians scrambled to verify the impossible. Earth was answering the call. At first, the response was dismissed as some kind of trick. Perhaps a raider had discovered the ancient human codes and was using them to frighten their enemies. Others thought it was an artificial signal, a mimic created by desperate colonists who hoped to stir help by invoking the most feared legend in history. But then came the movement. A single ship broke the silence. A dark vessel emerged from deep space, its hull scarred by time yet radiating power. It bore the markings of Earth. Navy, though none had seen such ships for centuries. It slid into orbit above the dying colony without ceremony and broadcast a message in a voice that made blood run cold. The voice was calm, steady, precise. "This is Earth, we have received your distress signal." The words were not shouted. They were not dramatic yet. Every being who heard them felt the weight of iron in their hearts. The raiders who had laughed as they burned cities fell into sudden silence. Their leaders scoffed at the message, muttering that humanity was dust and that some relic crew was playing at war. But the unease in their eyes betrayed them. The colonists who had believed themselves doomed wept openly. For them it was like hearing a ghost that had come not to haunt, but to fight. Whispers spread like wildfire across the stars. Fleets reported the signal. Governments confirmed it. The impossible had happened. Humanity was not extinct. Their silence had only hidden them, and no one knew why. Questions erupted across council halls. Where had they been? Why now? Why answer for a small colony on the edge of nowhere? Some feared that the return of Earth meant another war of fire and steel. Others hoped it meant salvation. Yet everyone understood one thing clearly. The galaxy had changed the moment the signal was answered. The lone warship began to deploy scouts. It moved with terrifying efficiency. Its engines burned with technology unfamiliar even to advanced species. Sensors detected shielding systems that should not exist at this size. Its weapons bristled, though none fired. The human crew did not need to display strength. Their mere presence was enough to shift the balance of fear. Raiders who had come to plunder began to retreat, their confidence cracking under the weight of an old memory. The colonists watched in awe as the warship hung above them, a guardian from the grave. For the first time in thousands of years, humanity had spoken, and the galaxy listened. The silence that had shrouded Earth was broken. The myth was real. And though the ship's captain gave no promises of alliance or conquest, the very fact that humanity still lived was enough to ripple across every world. And while the colony clung to hope, the rest of the galaxy wondered what would come next. For if humans had survived, then they had done so for a reason, and no one knew if that reason would bring salvation or doom. The distress call. The colony beneath the burning skies had believed it was living its final days. Families huddled in shattered shelters while the invaders marched through the streets with fire and steel. Their resistance had been crushed. Their defenders slaughtered their leaders, executed as an example for all who dared to fight back. The invaders had come with overwhelming numbers, sleek warships, and cruel laughter. The colonists had prayed for any kind of miracle, but even they did not imagine that the miracle would come in the form of an ancient human warship hanging silent in orbit above their world. The first moments after the transmission were filled with disbelief. Some thought they had imagined the voice, others whispered that perhaps some machine had replayed a recording of the past. Yet when the human ship's shadow cut across the sky, the truth could no longer be denied. It was there, real and alive, and its presence filled both the colonists and the invaders with emotions they could not fully understand. The colonists wept with renewed hope while the invaders began to argue among themselves. Should they test this ghost? Should they challenge the species that had been whispered about for generations as both destroyer and protector? The invaders gathered their fleet into position, believing numbers alone would crush the lone vessel. Their commanders broadcast their taunts, calling humanity weak and broken, mocking their return as nothing more than the desperate last stand of a dying species. But on the ground, the colonists heard the voice again. "This is Earth. Stand by for protection." The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of thunder. For the first time, the colonists felt a shield had been raised around them. A shield born not of technology, but of conviction. The human ship drifted closer to the planet as if daring the raiders to strike. It was not massive compared to the fleet arrayed against it, yet its design was unlike anything seen before. Its lines were sharp, its armor layered with a strange sheen that seemed to bend light. Its engines pulsed with a rhythm that no sensor could properly decode. Every alien eye watched it, and every alien mind reached the same conclusion: humanity had not merely survived, it had advanced in ways no one could predict. The invaders finally opened fire. Their ships unleashed torrents of energy across the void, blazing beams and missiles that streaked toward the human vessel. The colonists below cried out, believing the miracle would be shattered before their eyes. But the human ship did not fall. It moved with impossible precision, twisting through the storm of destruction as though it had rehearsed this dance. For centuries, its shields flared bright, then absorbed the onslaught like water over stone. When the fire ceased, the warship was still there, unbroken and waiting. The reply came swift. A single barrage leapt from the human ship, its weapons speaking with deadly clarity. The beams cut across the invader fleet with surgical strikes, and 3 enemy warships were torn apart in silence before the others even realized what had happened. The colonists roared with joy, their despair turning into unshakable belief. The invaders, who had never known fear in battle, began to hesitate, and their commanders barked orders to regroup. Their confidence was shaken, for they had thought humanity gone, and now they faced the reality of its return. On the ground, a young colonist named Karis lifted his child into his arms and whispered, "Humanity is alive, humanity has come for us." His words spread among the people like fire in dry grass. Their spirits rose from the ashes as they watched the ship defend them. Above the planet, the invader fleet hesitated, unwilling to press forward yet unwilling to flee. The human vessel broadcast again, "Leave now, or face destruction." The voice was still calm, still steady, but it carried the promise of annihilation. Some of the invaders scoffed, but none moved forward. They had all heard the old stories about humanity, stories of battles where humans fought until their last breath, stories where they turned hopeless wars into impossible victories. And now, faced with the proof that humanity was not gone, those stories no longer seemed like legend. They seemed like warning. The invader fleet pulled back slightly, regrouping in cautious formations, while the colonists cheered. The single human warship had changed, the fate of a world far beyond the battlefield. The Galactic Council received the reports. Representatives argued, some demanding proof, others insisting that this was a dangerous trick. Still, the evidence mounted: transmissions, recordings, wreckage of destroyed invader ships. Every new detail confirmed the same truth: humanity had answered the distress call, the question that lingered. Across every council chamber and every fleet command was simple. Why now? Why reveal themselves after so many years of silence? And though no answer came, the galaxy understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity's return, the invader, fleet drifted at the edge of orbit, their ship still scarred by the opening strike that had shattered their confidence. They whispered to one another across encrypted channels, trying to decide whether to test their luck again or retreat and save their strength. But while they hesitated, the colonists below stared upward, their eyes fixed on the black warship that now hung like a shadow over their world. To them, it was more than a ship. It was proof that the myths of humanity were real and that those old legends had not been exaggerated at all. Humanity had returned, and with its return came the chance for survival. On the bridge of the human vessel, the crew moved with practiced precision. They were not many in number yet. Every one of them carried the weight of centuries. Their uniforms bore the insignia of Earth, yet their faces showed no fear, no hesitation. The commander stood silent, watching the enemy through the tactical display. His voice when he spoke was low and steady. No threats, no boasts, only instructions. Every order he gave was followed instantly, and the ship itself seemed alive. A predator finally stretching its muscles after too long in hiding. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Council chambers that had dismissed the first reports now buzzed with frantic debate. Could it truly be humanity? Could they have survived the purges of old? The archivists dusted off forgotten files and found records that described how humans had vanished into the void, refusing alliances and refusing surrender. Some claimed they had destroyed themselves in wars too brutal to be remembered. Others believed they had fled to some unreachable corner of space. The truth now was undeniable. They had endured, in silence, watching, waiting. Preparing for the moment they would step into the light once more. The invaders tried again to test the human resolve. They sent a squadron forward, small and cautious, firing probing shots across the shields of the black vessel. The response was immediate, precise, and merciless. The human ship did not unleash a storm, it did not waste power. Instead, it fired measured bursts, tearing the squadron apart one by one, until silence once again ruled the void. The message was clear: humanity had not returned weak. Humanity had returned evolved. For the colonists, this sight lit a fire of hope so strong that even their ruined streets felt alive with energy. Children cheered in the rubble. Soldiers who had laid down their weapons picked them up again, not to fight the invaders, but to show that they were no longer broken. Their leaders sent desperate messages to the human ship, begging for guidance, asking who they were and why they had come. The only reply they received was brief: "Protect your people, stay hidden until we are finished." The words carried more power than 1,000 promises. For the first time, the colonists felt that someone greater than themselves was watching over them. Among the invaders, panic began to grow. Their commanders shouted orders, but the crews no longer obeyed with full conviction. They knew the stories, they knew of human tactics that never followed reason. They had been told those were myths. But now, the myths were living and cutting through their fleets like knives. Some ships began to drift back, pretending to regroup, while others turned their weapons inward on their own commanders, desperate to escape before the storm grew worse. Fear had entered them, and it spread faster than any fireback on the council. World's diplomats argued in fear. Should they send fleets to confront humanity? Should they try to open negotiations? Should they remain silent and wait for Earth to reveal its intent? Every option seemed dangerous. Some feared that humanity would once again rise as conquerors. Others prayed they would return as protectors. None knew the truth, but all understood that humanity was no longer a forgotten species. Humanity was once again a player in the game of the galaxy, and every civilization would now have to rethink its place in the order of things. The black ship remained above the colony, silent and unshaken, while the invaders pulled farther back. The commander finally spoke once more, transmitting across every frequency that could hear. "This planet is under Earth's protection. Leave now, or be destroyed." The words were not shouted yet. They carried the weight of destiny. The invaders who had mocked now felt the chill of truth. For them, this was no longer a simple raid. For them, this was the moment they realized the galaxy was no longer theirs to take freely. Humanity had returned, and the balance of power would never be the same again. Clash of Legends. The invaders gathered the remainder of their forces determined to strike one last time. They could not retreat without bloodshed for their kind, believed that to show fear was worse than death. Their commanders rallied them with fierce words declaring that humanity was nothing more than flesh and bone, no stronger than any other race, and that their so-called myths were only echoes of a violent past. They swore that the old legends would fall in fire, and that the galaxy would see humanity broken again. For a moment, their courage held as they reformed into a massive fleet, ready to pour everything into one decisive battle. The human warship waited in silence, its dark hull gleaming against the starlight. The colonists below held their breath, watching the skies with wide eyes, knowing the storm was coming. Their cities still burned, their shelters still shook from the bombardments, and yet their fear had changed into something else. It was no longer hopelessness, but anticipation. They wanted to see what humanity would do. They wanted to see if the old stories of defiance and victory against impossible odds were true. The invaders launched their full assault. Hundreds of ships screamed through the void, unleashing energy beams, missiles, and kinetic slugs that painted the heavens with fire. The colony trembled under the weight of the attack, even though the weapons were aimed above them. It was as if the entire sky had turned into a war front, blazing with lights like a second sun. The people cried out, covering their ears as the sound of destruction rolled through the atmosphere. Yet above it all, the black ship danced. It did not meet fury with fury. It moved like a predator, weaving between fire and flame, as if the battlefield itself bent to its will. Every shot it fired was deliberate, precise, and merciless. Enemy ships exploded in blossoms of light one after another, not from overwhelming barrages but from surgical strikes to their weakest points. The invaders could not understand how the humans knew exactly where to strike. It was as though the warship had studied them for years. Every formation they attempted collapsed within minutes. Every desperate maneuver was countered before it could succeed. The colonists watching from the ground felt their hearts surge with awe. Humanity was fighting like no other species could. As the battle raged, whispers spread across the galaxy, carried by frightened messengers and intercepted signals. Fleets far away listened in disbelief. Councils fell into silence as they realized what they were hearing. Humanity was not only alive, humanity was destroying a force that should have outnumbered them 10-1. The clash was no longer just about a colony or an invasion. It was about legend colliding with reality. It was about the moment when myth became truth. The invaders fought on with desperation, but their morale was crumbling. Crews screamed at their commanders, refusing orders to charge into certain death ships. Broke formation, turning to flee only to be caught in the crossfire of their collapsing fleet. The humans pressed no advantage recklessly. Instead, they continued their measured strikes, taking apart the invader fleet as if they were dissecting prey, piece by piece. The fear in the enemy grew heavier with every loss. The commanders who had sworn to erase humanity from memory now whispered among themselves about retreat. On the ground, the colonists began to chant the word human as if it were a prayer. Children who had never known hope shouted it in the streets. Elders who had lived through endless wars wept as they spoke it aloud. For them, this was no longer about survival. It was about witnessing the rebirth of something greater than themselves. It was about knowing that the galaxy's balance of power had shifted forever because one species had returned from silence. At last, when the battle reached its height, the human commander spoke. His voice carried across every channel, calm and steady as ever. You fought against us, believing humanity was gone. You believed our silence was weakness. Now you see the truth. We do not fight for conquest. We fight for survival and for those who call for help. Leave now and never return. The words fell heavy across the invader fleet, and like a great tide, their resistance broke. Entire squadrons turned and fled. Those that remained were hunted down with precision, until only scattered wrecks drifted in orbit. The clash of legends had ended with a single truth. Humanity was no longer a ghost. Humanity was once again the storm that reshaped the galaxy, fear and awe. The battlefield above the colony slowly grew quiet wreckage of destroyed invader ships, drifting like black scars across the stars. The human warship held its place steady and unbroken while the colonists below stared in awe at the sky that had become both their terror and their salvation. For generations they had believed themselves alone, abandoned by the greater galaxy. But now they saw with their own eyes that humanity had returned, and that the old stories whispered in fear were not only true, but perhaps even less than the reality. In the council halls across the galaxy, news of the clash spread faster than any ship could travel. Representatives from countless species demanded answers. Some argued that humanity must be confronted immediately before their strength grew. Others whispered that it was already too late. The images of the battle broadcast by fleeing invader ships told a story of power, precision, and fearlessness that few could deny. The legends had always spoken of humans as creatures who fought with desperation, but what they had seen was not desperation, it was mastery. The colonists could not stop speaking the word human. They painted it on the walls of their shelters, they shouted it into the air. They clung to it like a sacred promise. To them, the black warship was more than a savior. It was a symbol that their cries had been heard by a species that had once walked among the stars and then vanished. Without explanation, children laughed for the first time in weeks. Elders who had resigned themselves to death now held hope again. For them, Earth was not a myth. Earth was a guardian. The invaders who survived limped away, carrying terror back to their kind. Their leaders raged in disbelief, claiming the defeat was the result of trickery or cowardice. Yet none could erase the memory of the black vessel cutting their fleets apart with surgical precision. None could forget the voice that spoke without anger, but with a certainty that chilled their bones. They began to whisper among themselves that humanity had not died but had hidden, and that in hiding they had grown stronger than ever before. Within the council archives, old records were unearthed. Some spoke of humanity as allies who had once given everything to save weaker races. Others described them as destroyers who refused to bow before stronger powers. The truth was muddled, buried under centuries of fear and propaganda. But what became clear was that every species had once known to fear them, and every species now had to decide whether to greet them with open arms or closed fists. The human commander did not press further after the battle. He offered no speech of conquest, no demand of tribute. Instead, he transmitted a message directly to the colony below. You are safe now. Begin rebuilding, and remember that Earth hears when the call is made. The simplicity of the words was more powerful than any grand declaration. For the colonists, it was proof that humanity had returned not as conquerors but as protectors. For the wider galaxy, it was a warning. If Earth could hear one cry for help, it could hear all fear, and awe walked hand in hand through every star system. Allies debated whether to send envoys to find humanity. Invaders plotted revenge while trembling at the memory of their loss. Traitors spoke of opportunity in a future where humans might open paths long closed. The galaxy had been stagnant for centuries, bound by politics and fragile truces, but now it stirred with new energy because a single warship had reminded everyone that legends could breathe. On the colony, the people built shrines of thanks to the humans, though they had never seen the crew or their faces. They lit fires in the night sky as a sign of gratitude, hoping that those above could see their devotion. For them, it was not about politics or power. It was about survival and the promise that they were not alone. The name, Earth, echoed across their ruined streets not as a memory but as a living force. The invaders who fled could not erase their shame. They carried stories back to their worlds, and those stories spread like wildfire. They told of weapons that defied reason, of tactics that shredded fleets as though they were made of glass. They told of a commander whose voice spoke with unshakable certainty, and in their voices fear outweighed anger, because they had glimpsed something greater than themselves, something that had watched the galaxy in silence and chosen to return at the moment of greatest need. In the end, the battle above the colony was more than a victory. It was a statement carved into the stars. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity was awake, and the galaxy would never again know the silence it once mistook for absence. For when Earth answered the call, it did so with the power to shake the foundations of every empire and every council, and with the promise that the legends were not legends at all, but warnings of what was yet to come. The decisive stand. The galaxy trembled as news of Earth's return spread from system to system. The humans no longer whispered about. They were no longer myths, but a force whose presence could no longer be ignored. The invaders, who had dared to strike the colony, now faced panic in their own ranks. Reports arrived that the humans had sent emissaries to neighboring systems to warn of the consequences of aggression. The message was clear. Humanity did not seek endless war, but humanity would not tolerate weakness or cowardice, and every species that had underestimated them was being forced to reconsider their place in the universe. The colonies that had long cowered beneath the shadow of stronger powers now began to rise with hope burning in their hearts, because they knew that the humans who had once been thought extinct were alive and prepared to act with a decisiveness that no one had imagined. The humans moved with precision, their warships streaking across the void like black comets, their tactics flawless and terrifying in their simplicity. Every engagement became a lesson in efficiency. The invaders who faced them realized too late that strategy and numbers mattered little against opponents who understood the very nature of conflict as if it were a living organism. The humans anticipated every move, countered every strike, and exploited weaknesses that others had not even noticed. For the first time in decades, no one could claim superiority, for the humans seemed to operate on a level above all councils, above all fleets, above all fears. On the colony, the people worked tirelessly to repair what had been lost. Their gratitude to the humans spilling into every action, they rebuilt their homes, their defenses, their lives with renewed purpose, inspired by the knowledge that Earth was watching, and that their survival mattered not just to themselves, but to a species whose history had been forged in hardship and triumph. The children mimicked the humans they had seen in the reports, pretending to command fleets, pretending to lead armies, pretending to protect worlds that were far beyond their reach. Yet in their play there was an understanding that humanity's essence was not just power but courage and ingenuity. The invaders scrambled to gather forces to launch a counterattack, but their communications were intercepted, their plans anticipated by humans who seemed to know instinctively where the next strike would come. Humans moved through the galaxy as though it were their home, as though they had never left. Their fleets cut a path through hostile space, not with mindless destruction, but with purpose and restraint, ensuring that the systems they protected remained intact, while those who sought to bring harm learned swiftly the cost of misjudging humanity. Every confrontation left survivors carrying stories of precision firepower and an unwavering calm in the face of chaos that would haunt the invaders for years. Councils across the galaxy convened, frantically debating whether to align with humanity or to resist them. Some feared domination, others saw opportunity. Yet all were aware that resistance would require an understanding far beyond anything they had prepared for. Humanity's return had upset every balance, every plan, every alliance, and left every species questioning the foundations of their power. The humans communicated with no arrogance, no declaration of conquest, only the quiet insistence that those who sought to harm others would face consequences swiftly and without hesitation. Amid the chaos, the humans themselves revealed little about their origins, their technology, or their strategy. What was known was that they operated as one entity, united in purpose and vision. Their ships moved as extensions of a mind that saw beyond individual systems, beyond individual races, and their crews displayed a calm confidence that inspired awe in allies and terror in enemies. The humans did not boast, yet every action carried an unspoken warning that they were the culmination of centuries of survival, innovation, and adaptation. A species that had mastered hardship and transformed it into strength. The decisive stand became not a single battle, but a series of calculated strikes across multiple star systems, each engagement demonstrating the humans' mastery of warfare, diplomacy, and strategy. The invaders who had once believed they were unstoppable now fled or surrendered systems without waiting for destruction. They could not comprehend while the colonists and allies rallied behind the humans, inspired not only by their power, but by the certainty that humanity would act when it mattered most. The galaxy watched, as legends walked again, legends that had been hidden but never gone, legends that would now shape the destiny of every species. The humans' presence was more than military might. It was a statement that the galaxy would never again underestimate, them that silence had never meant absence, and that every call for help would now find an answer that was precise, decisive, and unstoppable. The decisiveness of their stand sent waves across the stars, altering calculations, expectations, and alliances. For those who had doubted or despised humanity, there was only fear. For those who had hoped humanity would return, there was awe and unshakable faith that the old stories had merely hinted at the truth, and that the full force of human will was now awake. The final reckoning. The galaxy held its breath as humanity prepared for the confrontation that would decide not just the fate of the colony, but the balance of power. Across countless star systems, the humans had already proven their presence was unstoppable and their strategy flawless. Yet what awaited them now was a culmination of years of underestimation and arrogance from every race that had dared to dismiss them. The invaders amassed their forces in a show of desperation, their fleets stretching across orbital space like a dark storm ready to engulf everything in sight. Yet every commander knew in their hearts that the humans they had once thought extinct now wielded a force and an intelligence beyond comprehension. The humans moved not with chaos but with purpose, their fleets aligned as if guided by a single mind. Every ship, a weapon, every crew member, a master of their craft, and every maneuver, a lesson in strategy and precision. From the bridge of the lead human flagship, the commander surveyed the gathered fleets, the lights of alien warships reflecting in the polished panels. And yet there was no fear, only calm confidence. The humans had learned to convert every hardship, every struggle into strength, and every challenge into opportunity. Their weapon systems pulsed with energy, yet their use would be precise. No unnecessary destruction, only the exact force required to end the threat and protect the innocents who had relied upon them. The colonists watched from orbit with awe as humans coordinated movements across vast distances without error, every fleet acting in perfect synchrony, as though the void itself obeyed their will. Messages of surrender were ignored by some invaders who still clung to arrogance, but even their bravado faltered as human ships moved with speed and determination that seemed impossible to predict. When the first salvo struck, it was decisive and, unrelenting, the invaders' formations shattered like glass under pressure, their command ships disabled before they could coordinate a response. The humans did not gloat, they did not taunt, they simply acted with efficiency that left no room for hesitation or recovery. The colonists cheered as human forces swept through the battlefield, neutralizing threats with an artistry of war that was terrifying and beautiful at once. The invaders who had thought themselves powerful now fled or surrendered systems as they realized that resistance was not futile because of technology alone, but because of a species whose very will was unmatched, whose resolve could bend the course of battle, and whose courage inspired even allies to rise above their own limitations. Across the galaxy, species that had remained neutral or hidden began to reconsider their alliances, some seeking protection, some seeking knowledge, yet all aware that humanity had returned not as conquerors, but as guardians and arbiters of a new balance. The humans engaged with diplomacy as deftly as they engaged in battle, offering terms that were firm yet fair, ensuring that no civilization would feel humiliation, yet every aggressor understood the consequences of their miscalculation. For the first time in generations, the galaxy saw the full force of human ingenuity, resilience, and compassion, combined into a power that could not be resisted and would not be underestimated. In the final confrontation above the colony, the largest armada of invaders concentrated their forces, hoping to crush the humans in a single decisive strike. Yet the humans anticipated every move, countered every attack, and turned each attempt into a trap that left the enemy disoriented and broken. The colony watched in disbelief as human forces moved as one across the stars, destroying weapons platforms, capturing command ships, and liberating occupied territories without hesitation. The invaders who had once mocked humanity now surrendered one by one as the cost of resistance became unbearable, and the humans offered mercy not out of weakness but as an assertion of authority that demanded respect. When the last enemy ship surrendered, silence fell across the battlefield, then across the galaxy as species everywhere realized that humans had returned not as myths, but as living legends that no one could ignore. The colony celebrated the humans not only for their protection, but for their example, for the reminder that courage, intelligence, and unity could overcome any challenge, and that even when a species is thought gone, it can rise again with power and purpose that changes the course of history. The humans themselves did not linger in celebration. They set about ensuring stability, repairing what had been damaged, guiding those who needed it, and preparing the galaxy for a future where no species would underestimate them again. And as the stars finally settled into quiet once more, the humans looked to the distant reaches of space knowing that their story was far from over, yet confident that no call for help would ever go unanswered, and that their return had forever changed the galaxy, a force of life, determination, and hope that no one could ever erase. Humanity's true return. The galaxy was never the same after humanity answered the call, and yet even now their presence was more than mere force. It was an idea, a living proof that hope and courage could bend the course of entire civilizations. The humans moved through the stars with purpose and calm certainty, every fleet a statement, every action a lesson in what it meant to survive and thrive under impossible odds. The alien races who had doubted them now whispered in fear and admiration of a species that had been written off as extinct, but had returned stronger, wiser, and untouchable in their resolve. The humans did not seek domination, yet every system that witnessed their approach felt the weight of an intelligence that could not be ignored, and a determination that refused to yield. Above the planet that had sent the distress signal, the humans deployed their forces with grace and precision, capturing strategic points, neutralizing threats, and protecting those who had been abandoned, while the invaders who had once mocked them found themselves outmaneuvered and overwhelmed by tactics that seemed to anticipate their every move. The humans were no longer just survivors. They were architects of a new order in the galaxy, a presence that inspired allies and terrified aggressors in equal measure. Every battle was a display of ingenuity and teamwork, every maneuver a testament to a species that had learned to turn hardship into weaponry and compassion into strategy. The colonists watched with awe as humans moved like shadows in light across the void, reclaiming control and restoring hope in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to feel safe. The leaders of alien fleets met in desperation, seeking to find a weakness in humanity, yet every probe, every scan returned only admiration and frustration, because humans had no weakness to exploit, only strengths to respect and overcome. The humans communicated not just with words but with actions, teaching patience, intelligence, and courage as tools of power, and resilience as a shield against despair. They restored worlds, they healed wounds both physical and political, and they did it all with a quiet confidence that left no question about their supremacy. Not through terror, but through competence and the unshakable will to protect life wherever it could be found. In the final confrontation, the largest armada of hostile forces converged to test humanity one last time. And yet, even as weapons flared and fleets collided, the humans moved with unity and clarity unmatched in galactic history. They turned every attack into opportunity, every risk into advantage, and every moment into a lesson for those who still doubted them. The invaders who had counted on fear to control their enemies now surrendered to understanding because they recognized that humans were not merely fighters. They were architects of destiny and masters of consequence. The galaxy watched as humanity liberated worlds, not with hatred, but with determination, as if every act of mercy was also a declaration of power, and every victory a reminder that life itself could never be taken lightly by a species that refused to fade. And when the last enemy vessel yielded and silence returned, across the stars the humans did not gloat. They did not celebrate loudly, they simply ensured that peace and order were restored, leaving behind a trail of inspiration and proof that extinction was never the end, and that courage coupled with intelligence could make myths real again. The galaxy knew now that humans were eternal, not because of technology or weapons, but because of their will, their ingenuity, and their refusal to surrender to despair in the face of overwhelming odds. Every civilization that witnessed their return understood that history would remember this day not for the battles won, but for the demonstration that humanity had truly returned as a force of life and hope for all who needed it. The stars shone brighter as humans, prepared to move to the next call, knowing that wherever there was danger, injustice, or fear, they would arrive not as conquerors, but as guardians and as living legends whose story would echo across the universe forever, and humanity's true return had begun the end.